Hello, good evening, everybody. Uh,
I'm going to call you the honorable moderator from here on.
I will try not to record that, register that. Uh, so good to be here, Vikram. Since I have just half an hour, I'll start away with the first question to you. The session is titled, Is the Right Finally Writing? Um, you're a writer, but I don't want you to limit your answer to just writing. My question to you is really the right finally writing, or it always did? And if today we are asking this question, why are we asking it?
Thank you, Alo. And I think I'm guilty of framing this panel also, only for the simple reason that the right, R-I-G-H-T and W-R-I-T-E. It was just a play on the words there. But I think there is no real concept of a right and a left when it comes to India, at least. There is, of course, a left, but there is a non-left, which one can call as the right side, the nationalistic side, the dharmic side, call it as you may. And the right also, when we talk of it, I think there are several dimensions of it. There's the economic right and the economic left. I don't know what is left of, the two of them merge, I think, very seamlessly. We have a government which is called as right-wing, but then most of its policies are also welfare economics and socialist and so on. So the distinction in the world of economics, at least, I think somewhere merges. But when it comes to the domain of culture and religion, culture, identity, and so on, there the battle lines are drawn, and particularly in the field of humanities, where I think for a longest period of time, and particularly after independence, the thraldom with which a particular ideological hold was maintained on the writing, the reading, the capture of the mind itself, the intellect, that has ensured that not that people from the non-left side were not writing or thinking at all, but it was just that the space for that was increasingly getting shrinking. I think in 1968 you had someone like Nanaji Deshmukh of the then Jan Sangh establish the Deen Dayal Research Institute as a think tank. You can build an institute not just with brick and mortar, that also needs money, but after you build that, you need intellectuals who will actually ideate and give an alternative perspective, not just limited to history, which is my area of interest, but everything, economics, on policy matters, on international relations, on strategy, everything. Is there another world view which needs to be encouraged? So there were think tanks like this which came up, which didn't do much in those days, largely because careers were destroyed for people, particularly in academic circles, for holding a view contrary to the mainstream, the hegemonic hold of what is the leftist or Marxist viewpoint. And so these institutions were perhaps floundering, some few people here and there, and those who were there also, they would always be looked down upon, derided. Many of them were perhaps not conversant in English. They probably came from the hinterland. So a lot of regional, thinkers, regional literature, they didn't come into mainstream. They didn't catch the mainstream eye or of the mainstream media also. Of course, later in the 2000s, you had think tanks like, say, the Vivekananda International Foundation or the India Foundation and all of these, which started again at least cultivating these, conversations around an alternative viewpoint, which is very necessary, I think, in a democracy. There is nothing ideological about it. You need to have multiple, takes to the same issue. I think post 2014, the climate that's been created has become conducive for a lot of people to also come into the mainstream eye. They were always there. It's just that the media is now probably, looking at them with a lot more interest. As you reminded me, both Sanjeev and my first books, I think, came out in 2008. So it's been a 15-year journey for us. But then a lot of people think we've probably come into the space only now or so on, which is untrue. People were writing, people were thinking. It's just that the gaze and the attention that they received was not so much. And now people who have a pedigree, who have a background to match those on the other side, who can speak English, who can, also, hold festivals, do all kinds of things like this. I think that is the new, paradigm shift which one can see, particularly in the last decade or so.
So Sanjeev, when it comes to you, I remember you came and gave us a talk in school when Land of Seven Rivers was released, and then again with Ocean of Churn. The thing about you is that your books are so popular that, it much to the frustration of many, they can't, it's very interesting that they want to say something, but they can't because what is the best argument that you have faced when it comes to the kind of narratives you have set with your books, and they have become so popular that have been placed for you to refute the thesis that you have put on?
So, just to build on what my friend Vikram was saying, there was a period in the 60s, 70s, 80s when either there were relatively fewer writers or to the extent that the non-left was writing, it was not given too much credence. I mean, there was the odd person like Arun Shourie who would probably get some attention, but they were sort of thought of as a curiosity. Also important is that to the extent that the non-left was writing, they were defined still by the left in the sense that they were basically critiques of the left. Arun Shourie writes books which criticize, but they don't provide an alternative narrative. So the place where I probably and Vikram and some of the others basically broke new ground was that we presented a brand new narrative. And this is important because eventually critiques don't replace narratives. New narratives replace old narratives. So when I began doing these books, and I think for the first time they were properly very heavily referenced books, the response very often to some of the things I said, which may have come as a surprise to many others, like for example, Ashoka the not so great. Okay, now the image of Emperor Ashoka is built in a particular way. To have gone and challenged that obviously ruffled many feathers. Initially, the response was just ignore it. But when the books began selling, they were everywhere. The response then went to, at first, it's complicated. It's a tricky and complicated issue or something to that effect. Now, I thought that since I came from a different field and I wasn't an expert in history at all, I was writing popular books, that somebody would really come up with a solid argument which ripped apart everything I said. But I'm still waiting. And instead, what I have so far got is Caravan and Scroll and Wire and these kind of magazines writing articles and they being used to vandalize mine and his Wikipedia pages. But basically, the argument goes somewhat like this. That, yeah, it's complicated, but the real problem with him is that he's not a trained historian. Yeah, I never claimed to be a trained historian. I am an economist. That's my profession. Question is, are my facts wrong? Two, I'm hardly the first person to have made any contribution outside of his field of training. So don't bother about that. Tell me why my arguments are illegitimate arguments or incorrect arguments. And so far, I don't get real pushback on the arguments I'm making. I mostly get a pushback is that he doesn't have a PhD in history. So what? And incidentally, all those PhDs in history are mostly quoting Cunningham and Prinsep and all these people. Well, Prinsep was an East India Company clerk. Cunningham was a military engineer. None of them had PhDs in history either. You are all spending your time quoting them. So my view is that so far, I haven't had an intellectual pushback. Most of it has been personal attacks, that's it.
So one thing good about Sanjeev and Vikram is that they shift the focus away from Delhi. And for someone living in the South, you cannot imagine what a welcome thing that is, whether in the news, whether in the popular discourse, or whether in their books. I think that is one of the things that both of you have done wonderfully well. Salvatore, to bring you into the conversation now, I think speaking from a history perspective, 50 years from now, you will be the gaze of the foreigner looking into India. So today, when you have studied India for the last 2-3 years, it has been your area of focus. when you look at this discourse of right, left, what is your perception of this discussion and also the quality of the discourse?
First, I have to agree with Vikram that right and left don't have much meaning outside of their origins in 19th century Europe, but everyone knows what they mean here, and so for tonight, let's talk left and right instead of trying to be more technically correct. We haven't seen a real debate, and Sanjeev is right, we haven't seen a real debate between left and right histories in India. Instead, what we've seen is the displacement of a previously exclusive left narrative of history by this new right narrative. And the two sides maybe not be talking to each other, but if you go to the airport bookshelf and you look at the top 20 bestseller lists, it seems certainly the right, as you call it, are winning that non-debate. That is, they're selling the books. And so the new narrative, a narrative of New India, is replacing an historical narrative of old India. That old narrative is still there, the old authors are still around, they're still very well respected, but relatively fewer people are getting their history from them, and relatively more people are getting their history from the likes of Sanjeev and Vikram.
Vikram, coming to you again, you are a trained historian, so nobody can attack your academic credentials.
Oh, no, they can.
University of Queensland is not the best. We're very proud at University of Sydney to be the top history department in Australia.
That's a separate debate. So Vikram, the reason why I'm asking you is that, yes, like Sanjeev pointed out very rightly, that there is in the right the necessity felt to debunk the left narrative. But isn't it time that we also set narratives? And if we do it, how do we do it? And the second part of this question is, you can observe also the quality of the output of the right. Do you have anything to say about the quality? Is there, do people lend themselves to jingoism, to non-facts, present them as facts? Do you have any complaint about the way the right is going about it, or everybody has a space? What should be the ideal way to tackle this? The first one was we debunk. So shouldn't we be also setting the narrative?
Yeah, that is very true, Alo, because, you know, I mean, in this very city, I think a couple of weeks ago or something, there was a much publicized lecture by eminent historian, Professor Romila Thapar, at the India International Center. And the response that I saw, particularly on social media, was a lot of people on the so-called right side was, let's run a campaign to cancel this lecture. And then there were letters written to the secretary of IIC. There were all kinds of things like that. Now here is a person, a nonagerian, who has an established body of work over several decades, and that has made deep roots in academia. It has influenced minds. It has kind of crafted the manner in which we look at history and historiography, particularly of ancient India, of which he claims to be a scholar. Now, by shutting down one simple lecture of half an hour or 1 hour of this person, I don't know how that can be a response of any sorts. If I would be, my suggestion would be asked, a lot of people should have gone and attended that lecture, countered the person with the facts that they think are correct, or if that is not allowed, it's a closed door meeting or something. Post-lecture, I sat through and listened to the entire lecture as it was happening. Five people could have sat and drafted a point-by-point rebuttal of everything that the esteemed scholar said. I think that is a better manner than doing these very, very reactionary, and I think that reduces the entire quality of what you stand for. And then it becomes very easy for the other side to beat you down, saying, they only disrupt, they only involve in boycotts, they are fascists, they are undemocratic and all of that, which is counterproductive to your own cause. So have the intellectual heft to actually challenge And I think Sitaram Goyalji did that once when the same person had made all kinds of claims about, Buddhist persecution at the hands of Hindus. Stating 3 inscriptions, 2 of which turned out to be fake, and one was very obscure. It was not related to that. He actually challenged her to an open debate, a public debate, to talk about this, and that was never, accepted, and the debate never happened. And that was never, accepted, and the debate never happened. So I think, setting the narrative, as Sanjeev said and as you mentioned, that is very important. You don't all the time have to be reactionary. You don't have to all the time be, destructive, defensive also, even including the kind of books sometimes that get written. It's almost like what Sanjeev said, a critique or a defense. It's like a lawyer arguing in a court, which is not how a book needs to be. I think, you can set narratives in a different way. We have Dr. Uday Kulkarni, who's sitting here, who, through his work on the Marathas, and which was, I think, dying to be told, it's a shame that in mainstream Indian historiography, despite the copious amount of documents that are there of the Peshwa Daftar and so on, nobody thought it important to write the book. So this is the kind of work which sets a new tone. So I think that is more important. And rebuttal, there is I think a entire spectrum of writing on both sides. It's not that everything that the left writes is also extremely academically, brilliant and sound and so on. So there is riffraff on all sides. But then the usual tendency is, as we discussed earlier, to make everything that the non-left writes, to deride it as being unscholarly, pick holes at everyone's qualification, background, and this and that, which is the kind of standard operating techniques that are engaged everywhere. In fact, to add to what Salvatore said, I think Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times had mentioned that I don't think this is a uniquely Indian problem. In an article called Liberal Intolerance, he said even in the universities in America, I think only 7 to 11% of scholars are those who come from a conservative kind of a background, and that in the humanities. And in the social sciences, that further, reduces to about 6 to 7%.
And all of them are economists. So
yeah, yeah.
In the non-economics field, there is none.
There is none. So yeah, so there is this but there are at least that many people who are probably a part of that academic setup in the US, for which there is some critique. Here probably the numbers would be even more less. I don't know what is the, also the squeamishness about, for many people on the non-left side, to own up and claim, yeah, we do have a conservative opinion, and there's nothing wrong. It's a very legitimate, it's a democratic, it's an academic, position to have, and own it up with pride, wear it on your sleeve as a badge of honor.
Sanjeev, you have written the book on the revolutionaries, and I was, just for curiosity, to compare how people interpret. I was looking up Gandhiji's statement in the Karachi Congress after they were hung. And it was very interesting because there's a very clear statement that says, while we dissociate ourselves from this act, and then it goes on to. So it's very interesting if you do a Google search, there's a whole lot of people who have written about, actually, Gandhi was sympathetic. Look at how well he has written about Bhagat Singh. But the fact is that the Congress did dissociate itself. Now, something like your book, Revolutionaries, it's a welcome, finally, a change. And it's, again, I have to continue to tell that your book reads very easily, and I'm so glad it's popular. So the reason why I'm asking you this question is that, when you set a narrative like this, you would expect, if at all there is a counter argument, you would expect it to come. But there is something I have learned from you, and that is observe the left. They kill a debate by silence. So do you think this is happening again, that nobody is going to come up with the counter of what has been said about our freedom movement far?
I think they have now no longer have that power. They did at one point in time, and which is why they have finally begun to write nasty articles about the two of us, and they will shortly about you as well. Prepare for it. But the thing is that there was a time when they could simply ignore and hope that we would go away. that is no longer possible. And so there will be some sort of a response. As I said, mostly not about our facts, mostly about us as people. But I think you have to remember that I come from another field where some of this has happened in the past and some part of that battle has been won. So today, there is no serious argument left really from the left about socialism. And you can argue about various shades of market economy. You can be a mercantilist, right? You can belong to free marketeer, whatever. But by and large, nobody really. Our economy now is a market-based economy. You can argue about the exact mix of it, but basically that is now the story. Now here too, this problem used to exist. If you go back to the 80s and even in the early 90s, when I was at university, by the way, the curriculum used to be entirely to the left. I was in university when the Soviet Union collapsed, when the Berlin Wall fell, and our own economy went through a crisis and we went through reforms. So we could clearly see that we were heading into a new world of market reforms, and Manmohan Singh was, dismantling the old system. But our textbooks went on and on about how wonderful Preobrazinski, there was one Soviet writer we were still studying, and how wonderful Mahalanobis's 5-year plans were. So in some ways, what happens very often is that the events simply are ahead of what the so-called intellectuals are doing. So in fact, when the 1991-92 reforms were going on, the intellectuals of that time, please go and read them. They were all to a man and woman saying how terrible and it was going to cause such great bad things that were going to happen in India as a result of those reforms. Now 30 years on, I think everybody agrees it was a good thing. So what I'm trying to say here is, look, sometimes the dam simply bursts. And it doesn't matter. You can't ignore it or do anything. Now it doesn't matter that the new types of stories are coming out. You just heard Kashmir Files just before that. He was much ignored before that, till Kashmir Files suddenly blew through. And I do remember till Kashmir File happens, Vivek was much mocked as a failed director who would never make it. But now I don't think anybody says that anymore. So I think this business of let's ignore it, the silence is some way of sort of keeping them out of the conversation. I think that point has been crossed in other things. As I said, the point was crossed on the economy in the 90s, and then it became, nobody really reads. I don't know. I don't think I've read the EPW in like 20 years. I'm sure they still publish articles about how wonderful Nehru was and all that, but I don't think anybody reads them anymore.
And social media is derided actually as a non-intellectual space. You think that it has played a role in both the people like you in India getting a foothold in terms of a following?
Maybe. It certainly is the case that it would have been more, it provided a pathway for getting ideas out. So do remember that I already had other pathways because of my work as an economist. But it is certainly the case, it was easier to popularize them outside of the mainstream media, where I would have got edited in various ways and so on. So I do think that, yes, and of course getting feedback loops instantaneously if you said something. So yeah, so that is definitely the case that at a time when mainstream media simply would is tightly controlled, the social media did provide avenues for telling other narratives. No question of that.
Salvatore, I have two parts to the question, and this is about the noise that the left makes. In India, we are very concerned. We get very agitated with the content that's coming out, and we make a lot of noise. First of all, I suffered through your interview with Abhinandan Sekhri, and I listened to the people you read in India. So we have that set of writers. And then in India, we also make a big fuss about Indian columnists writing in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. So for someone studying India academically, can you tell us, first of all, the texture of the noise that reaches you when it comes to all this noise? And second is, can you evaluate that noise for us and see what has really an impact to us academically, socially, economically? What sort of really, how much weight should we give to these writings?
It's clear that the New India right has had essentially zero exposure outside India. It has become the dominant literature inside India, but India outside India is still completely what you call an establishment left narrative. They're the ones who have access to the international media, who write op-eds for the major newspapers, who are at the international literature festivals as opposed to the Indian literature festivals. Now, with the rise of the Indian diaspora, that's likely to change. I expect, if you haven't already, that both of you will be speaking extensively out to Indian diaspora audiences, and so there will be some change. But right now, the international narrative on India is entirely shaped by the old establishment left.
And how seriously should we take the editorial positions of, say, the Wall Street Journal?
Those editorial positions are shaped by the people they know. It's not white Americans writing the editorials about India for The Economist or The Washington Post or The Wall Street Journal. It's their NRI Indian or Indian adjacent or American of Indian background authors who are writing those unauthored editorials. What's more, if you look at the op-eds on India, again, in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, almost all of the op-eds are by people of Indian origin. And again, they're still overwhelmingly coming from the old establishment left, not from this new India right. And I think the best way to change that is probably to work through the diaspora. You won't be able to work at the elite level directly with these organizations because they have social connections who monopolize their access. The old left intellectuals effectively act as gatekeepers for the West about their knowledge of India. We only know India through this small group of people. Yet the diaspora knows India. I think that's one way to get your message out. And then, of course, if the more people actually come to India and study India, the more people like me will be aware that there are two sides to every story.
And I've seen tweets of yours visiting Varanasi, etc. So, what is your opinion, take back on the academic circle, the LitFest circuit, as opposed to the people? Have you got a feel of what their concerns are, and is this discourse even important in their lives?
Look, I have to be humble here. I'm a monolingual, English-speaking, American atheist, liberal intellectual. I can't tell you what the people of India think, except through survey research. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that on Sunday. We have a lot of very good survey research about what Indians think, and that tells us that it's very different from the narrative we hear coming out of the left liberal establishment.
That's a clue, that's a hint. Do I have the time to...
7 minutes.
7 minutes.
Okay. So, no, I have actually 2 more minutes to ask a question. Vikram, my 5 minutes of Q&A.
Okay.
My last question to you is this. When I'm actually going to talk about your forthcoming book, which is Tipu. So the reason I'm asking you is that, when we have set ideas, like you said, when a name comes up, we either are for or against. The discourse is so strong. So when you write a book, do you have an agenda that this is a myth I'm going to break or create? Or what makes you write really? Like, what is your pursuit? What are you seeking when you write?
For me, very clearly, Alo, I think a historian's role is to illuminate the facts, illuminate the archives, illuminate documents as they appear to him or her, and not go with a preconceived idea. This much talked about, forthcoming book on Tipu Sultan. It's not like some answer to someone. It is not to break all the myths that are there about him. It is my exploration of this person. And in the process, if new narratives are built or existing ones are broken, I think that is just a very unintended consequence. I think if a writer or a historian begins the journey with that in mind, then the difference between a propagandist and a scholar, I think it's a very, very thin line. To sum up, I think, to the larger, theme that we have of this panel itself, I think the only answer to all the amount of material that is there that exists already on the establishmentarian side is more and more scholarship, and more and more scholarship that cannot be emphasized more. All these other things, social media, these things, I mean, they are very, very ephemeral. It lasts for a few days, but ultimately, as writers ourselves, we would like to believe that a book captures the mind for generations, and many decades after we are dead and gone as well. So the power of scholarship and how we can nurture that can happen through various ways. Traditionally, government does it, or business corporations and private individuals who are HNI and so on, or religious and social cultural organizations which also sponsor scholarship. In the case of India, most of it is absent on all the three counts. The government doesn't sponsor, which is good. It's good that the government keeps out of a lot of this. A lot of people on the non-left side who are, well endowed, they don't put their money where their mouth is. There is not enough of sponsorship for ventures of scholarship, which is very, very unfortunate. There was just one such initiative which I ran with Miss Asha Jadeja Motwani. We ran a one-year fellowship program to actually encourage scholars, and some of them are here, sitting here. Ankur Kakkar, Abhas is here, and few others. So 7 people, 1 year's fellowship where every month, sizable amount of stipend is given to them, and the ask is at the end of the year you bring out a manuscript which is worthy of publishing with a mainstream publisher. So every year you bring out 10 books. In 10 years you have 100 books. That is the only way I think one can build a corpus which can give an effective answer. Now, once that body of work is created, how that can be used, through social media, through videos, through all kinds of other things, OTT series and films and all of that, that is the secondary thing as to how you can disseminate the information. But the heavy lifting, the research, the documentation, that dirty work, getting down, getting your hands dirty, that is most important if one really needs to shift the needle of the narrative and bring up something new and original which makes sense for the long term.
Thank you. Before questions, just one little correction. I am no historian at all. I read historians to inform my classes. I am not a historian. Okay, any questions?
There's a lady there. Okay, there's somebody with a mic, and then to that lady there.
Hello, sir. My question is mainly geared towards Sanjeev sir and Vikram sir. What I want to ask is, I can't help but notice that this emergence of right-wing or non-left literature has accelerated in post-2014 era. So I can't help but wonder that there's a political, not intentional, but some aspect to it. So what I'm wondering is, if in the future things change, is this sustainable? I want it to be sustainable. Is there a risk of going back to the original situation?
So let me say, first of all, that it's not a coincidence, because in a sense, both the political emergence as well as the emergence of this literature have co-evolved. They are reflections of a particular time in our history. So in that sense, it's not the case that in 2014, a particular government came in power and suddenly this literature came up. I mean, many of my books are published before 2014. So both of these phenomena happened together. And I think they feed on each other, maybe to some extent, it's possible. But it is, at least my work is totally self-funded. I have never taken a single cent from any organization, government or non-government, for doing my research. So my work is, at least, and I think that may be also the case in Vikram's case. Therefore, any change in the political dispensation, at least in my case, will have zero impact. Having said that, certainly for as with everything, it's not black and white. So there may be a person like myself who may continue doing that irrespective of the political situation. But certainly the sort of mahal, so to speak, matters. And there are certain kinds of things that may become much more difficult to do in a different environment. For example, movies may be more of a particular kind, may be more difficult to show, or OTT series will be, or these kinds of things may be more difficult to do in a different dispensation. It's possible. And we see that even at the state level, it happens quite often.
One more question, the lady here.
I have a question.
The lady, let's take a question on the lady.
Thank you. So I'm going to run really ahead of that question there and ask you, are we ever going to see the change in narrative that's, all of you have got here, reflected in academia in this country, and a change in curriculum? I don't know if I'm really running ahead with this.
Well, it takes time because this has been an entrenched system for 7 decades after freedom. So to expect it to happen overnight is tough. But then, as I said earlier, the beginning point for that is to generate new scholarship. A lot of people, let's remove Irfan Habib's books, let's remove Romila Thapar's books, let's take them away. But what do you replace it with? What is the other alternative that you have? So the first step is to first create, newer scholarship. And then once that scholarship gains ground, either through the popular medium or through academic circuits, then it's a matter of time. Because I'm told that my Savarkar volumes have now been included as reading material for the Delhi University itself. So it's going to take time. Someday maybe that's going to become the textbook in place of the Bipin Chandra and the
Bravehearts a class is doing, Revolutions a class is doing. I want to claim that.
In her school, our books are being taught to the students. So I think it's a process. It'll take time, but it's on.
Thank you.
Time's
Looking
up,
forward.
Unfortunately.
have
That's
a
all we
question.
have time
Can I-
for. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.